kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou kua hui hui mai nei ki tēnei hui ipurangi I tēnei ahi. Ka nui taku mihi ki a koutou. So hi, welcome to our webinar this afternoon. My name's Meg Back. I'm a member of the NZILA Executive, and today with me is Jackie Bowring, Peter Kensington, and Katrina. Katrina Arrow is our new events coordinator and also the convener of these awards. And they say that every cloud has a silver lining, and we're extraordinarily pleased to have secured the services of Katrina. When she came home from overseas, we're really pleased with the calibre of her experience, and we feel very lucky. So Katrina is currently running this webinar, but she will also be handling the, I'll give a brief update. Jackie will talk about how to submit an award, and then as time allows, Katrina will be convening the questions and winding up. So onto our judges panel for this year. Again, we're delighted to be able to confirm our judging panel for these awards. These highly qualified people have volunteered their time and considerable expertise, and we couldn't run the awards without their input. So on to some updates. I'd like to just acknowledge that there was a really robust process prior to the 2019 awards by a very experienced working group led by Julia Wick. And that essentially is the basis of the awards that we're running this year. The process has been updated with response to feedback by Jackie, Frank Boffer and Peter Kensington, and there's some changes, but there's great scope to celebrate and promote our industry. So the process, there will be a call for entries late November. Entries will close Friday, the 28th of January. So plan your putting together of those entries. There will be site visits by the jury at the end of February to the shortlisted projects. And of course, put it in your diaries right now, the awards dinner, 27th of May, 2022, not to be missed. Now, one of the changes that we have made is an expansion to the category previously known as small projects. Now, there was a quote the other day in the meeting about the NZILA book from Dennis, and he said that there's very significant projects that don't get awards, but where we've often led the world in terms of restoration processes. And that's where we feel sometimes we don't recognise the added value that landscape architecture brings to any project, regardless of scale. So there'll be a full description of the Iti Pounamu category, but essentially it reflects the whakatauki, ahakoa he iti he pounamu. Things, though it is of small, it is of great value. So, I mean, there's projects that are not award winners, but you've done an amazing things. Maybe you ran collaboration, which really set up a great relationship going forward with mana whenua and the other stakeholders, and that's endured. Or maybe you redesigned a seat that made it so much more efficient to implement that you could get 10 instead of 2. Or maybe you were only doing something really simple like a stock effluent disposal site, but you managed to put in 2,000 local native plants which were endangered and really made a difference. I mean, it's up to you to justify what you've done that's led to this fantastic outcome. But I'm sure once you start thinking about it, you'll think of all of those projects which weren't necessarily award winners, but where the landscape architect really showed their value. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jackie Bowring, who is going to talk to you about how to enter the awards. So over to you, Jackie.
Great, thanks, Meg. Ahi ahi Mārie. So I'm going to go through a few slides, just essentially giving a little bit of a feedback on some of the experience last time and some, I guess, tips to help with that process of communication with your entry. So the first one is really to keep in mind that when you're putting your entry together, it's really a process of crafting that entry. So in the first bullet point there, to remember it's not just about sort of squashing an existing project into the required format, but really going that extra distance to communicate what's really excellent about your project. So second point there is an example, if it's something like expert evidence, don't just include the whole document verbatim, but think about what the qualities of excellence are in that evidence. For example, it might be something innovative in terms of methodology, and highlighting that for the judging panel is going to make it that much easier for us to really appreciate what you've done. Even doing things like including a summary of the key points so that we can really appreciate that without having to try and work it out for ourselves. As well as that sort of overarching sense of trying to communicate what's really significant about your work, there's also going to be some format requirements that you will need to work to and really make the most of that in terms of thinking about things like the layout, developing a bit of a sequence, maybe the narrative of the project and so on. So again, it's about that thing of communicating your project clearly to the judging panel in the first instance, and and ultimately successful entries will be shared online, so that communicating even to a lay audience is really important as well. So on to the next one, about sort of describing your project clearly. And sometimes it's just a reminder not to assume that the judging panel knows anything about your project. So we did have some experiences last time around where it was quite difficult to even work out where a project was. And sometimes the address was a little bit vague. So having, even things like some maps and so on to help us to locate it. And alongside that, a sense of, what the design did in terms of transforming that site, for example. Was it a green field? Was it a brown field? Was there, something already on the site before? Because although some of the panel might be local to that area and be familiar with the design, it's about communicating with all of us, and again, beyond the judging process itself. Alongside that, another thing that came up a little bit last time was sometimes it was hard to see the edges of where that influence of the design was. How big was the intervention, especially when it butts up against a previous design? What was that balance in terms of your involvement? So it's really helpful to the judging panel to have that really clearly described. Another thing that really helps in that appreciation of what is excellent about a project is to have some endorsements from clients, from communities and so on, that rather than the entrant themselves sort of speaking about how amazing a project is, if you can support that with the views of others, it really adds value to your entry. And we can see that sort of, I suppose, like a peer review or something like that. It might have been in the media, all sorts of aspects that could really just give those other perspectives on the design as well. The point 4 is about presenting work effectively and honestly. So the first point there is about using graphics and imagery to convey the project effectively. And there's another comment later about, that there's the opportunity to upload photos of the project as well as the PDF document. And that's really important, that we get something that's really, makes it stand out from the range of entries. But the balance of that is just to take care with not manipulating any of those images as well. There were some instances of, digital renders and so on that looked very real, but in fact, when we went to the site, the projects weren't like that. So if it's something that maybe you imagine it looking like that in 100 years or something, maybe it's a bit early to enter it. So think about that. We did have also experiences of visiting projects in the real world to find that they were still being planted, grass was still being sown, elements of the site were still being painted and so on. So really being honest about whether that project's ready for submission, or maybe might be better to wait for another round of awards. Another dimension of presenting the work it's really useful if you can to include metrics to support claims, about how well a site is performing. And that's one thing that I've become very aware of recently, because I was involved in an international project about critiquing a subdivision, Te Pariki, next to Lincoln University. And we did a lot of work on the metrics for that, thinking about things like, rather than just claiming that it sequesters carbon, can you actually provide some evidence, which can be done as a desktop calculation and so on, but thinking about things like surveys of residents and so on, all that sort of aspect that can help demonstrate how well that site has performed. The other point there is about acknowledging all the collaborators on a site, which might include previous work that's been done on a site and contributes to the success of the project. So it's about being sure to be inclusive about all the different professionals and other contributors who might have been involved in putting that project together, bringing it into reality and so on, and really just being expansive in terms of including all of that as well. Next point is about communicating effectively. So there will be some requirements in terms of how you put together your entry, but this is just a reminder about things like text, to make sure that the text is clear and succinct. Some of the entries last time round had quite extensive text that were not very focused on what the key points were. So really craft that text to help communicate what's important about your project. And that includes the practical side of it as well, a font size and style that reads well, and keeping in mind that we're going to be looking in the first instance at digital documents. So making sure that it reads really well on screen is important. And that includes the images as well. So making sure that the images are at a high resolution so that we can see them clearly in terms of what we need to see. Number 6, this is where I feel like I'm talking to my students again, proofread. It was amazing to see some of the text that came through last time, even one that had a comment on it, draft only, not for discussion, printed on every page. So make sure that, someone else in the office or, friend or family member or someone has to read through it and just checks for spelling errors or text that should have removed. Things like captions, scales and north points, again, sort of basics in terms of communicating the orientation of the sheet, the scale of it, all those things that will help us in interpreting what we see on the page. Really, really appreciated. And this final point here is a reminder that the winning entries that will be published online in the awards showcase. So that's where, just to reiterate some of the points that I've just made, it becomes super important that all external collaborators, key contractors, products and so on are all disclosed in that entry, because, it's important that everybody gets their mention in terms of that input. Again, about readability and accessibility for the online experience. So think about how viewers might navigate through your entry, how the images might show up. Keep in mind as well that a lot of the award showcase is about promoting beyond our profession as well. So thinking about people who might not be familiar with some of the terminology, might not be that used to reading plans and so on. So how can you put that package together in a way that communicates really clearly and you'll be proud of when you see it out online in the award showcase. Just to reinforce that point that I just made, proofread thoroughly. And that includes both the document that you put together, but also when you go to enter, you'll see it's an electronic form that you fill in online. So, when you're typing away and filling in those boxes, just take extra care with that text that you're entering, even copying and pasting it from Word or something, because that is the text that goes on and makes up the award showcase as well. So the better and clearer it is at that point, the better it will turn out in the end. And when you do go to submit your entry via that electronic uploading site, you'll see that you can include some photographs, up to 8. So that's really important to make the most of that as well, because it's really the photographs that will be included with that award showcase, and having that visual excitement that people will be able to see when they see the different entries, the winning entries. That makes it so much more visually attractive than, say, just one photograph or something. So really make the most with that. One exciting new development this time round is that we do have one free entry per submitter. And this is really an important new development because the Institute really wants to encourage a lot more variety in submissions. And that includes the smaller practices, you know, in a range of locations across the Motu. You know, we're conscious that, you know, maybe in some of the regional areas where the large firms aren't present, that we might be missing some of those, you know, amazing projects that are going on in those locations. And that cost can be a bit of a barrier in terms of entering. So this is a really great development that we can increase the diversity of submissions, we can increase the number of entries so we have a bigger pool of projects to look at. And there's, you know, fantastic opportunities for those projects to be showcased, including the shortlisted projects as well. So that's really going to give coverage and, you know, gain in that whole promotion of the profession, of your practice, of the projects and so on. We have some challenges as well. So the enduring landscapes category is a really excellent one. And what we would like to think about is for, you know, maybe even amongst the branches, to think about projects that have really stood the test of time and to nominate those for that enduring landscapes category. I'm always conscious in the Architects Awards that they do a really brilliant job with recognising projects that have endured. And it'd be great if we could, you know, start developing up a real sense of legacy for the historic projects that make up the profession, especially, you know, at this next awards were coinciding with the 50th. It's a really great time to be thinking about that sense of endurance in terms of the landscapes we create. And as Meg mentioned, the new category, well, the developed category of Haiti Pounamu, to really think about that value added in perhaps unexpected ways sometimes in terms of maybe scale, the type of input that a landscape architect has had to a project. It's really great to think about the diversity of what we do in our practice as well. Finally, we're really looking forward to seeing if anyone has any questions, and so feel free to put those into the Q&A chat box. I'll hand over to Katrina to convene those.
Thanks, Jackie, for that update. We'll just give people a few moments. If you've got any questions, this is your chance. We've got Peter also joining from the judging panel. So we've got some great people here to answer any of the questions that you may have to help you put your best foot forward. Great, so there's a question here from Paul. How many awards are given per category?
Am I going to answer this?
Go for it, Jackie.
Okay, there's not a set number. There's awards of excellence, and then there's a winner in the category, which would normally just be one award, except in exceptional circumstances. But we don't have a set number. Sometimes there actually isn't an award in a category if there are none of the entries you know, reach the level that we need them to. Do you want to add something, Meg?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Jackie. It's about recognition. So hopefully there will be one in each category that just stands out and representing excellence and something that we can all learn from and that we promote. But when there's other standout entries in that category, it would be the judge's discretion to award those as excellence as well. The other thing too is that at the judge's discretion, if they feel you're not quite in the right category, they may advise that they would like to change your entry to a different category.
Yeah, that leads quite nicely onto the question that's just come in from Phil, which is if you have something that doesn't fit neatly within the established category, how might that initiative be accommodated?
Yeah, so we have had that experience in the past, and that's usually in a conversation with the entrant. Sometimes, and it might be a recommendation of moving categories where it might be a better fit. And also with this new Haiti Punamu category, I think it gives us a little bit more flexibility as well in terms of things that might not fit well in any category, and still, you know, allows us to give recognition to those projects as well.
Right. So there's a question about the online forms. Can you enter in draft before submitting? Meg, do you know the answer to that?
I don't. That sounds like a Vicky question. We might have to explain that later.
So the answer is no.
No.
So no. So have a look at the online form, perhaps prepare it in a Word document, and then come back and copy and paste in your answers when you're ready to submit.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up question from Phil around the fitting of your project into a specific category. So when do you have that korero and with whom? So would you recommend they submit it in the category that best fits, they think best fits, and then you'll come back from the judging panel?
Yeah.
If not?
I mean, that might happen at a couple of points. So it might be at that initial, when the entries are first received, it might be clear that it perhaps is not in the right place, in which case maybe you as convener, Katrina, might be the one who navigates that particular korero, or it might happen later once we get further into the judging process and get a bit more into the depth of the project, and then, you know, it might come from me, perhaps as head judge, or again through Katrina via convening.
Great.
Can I add too, once we've put out the call for entries, there is the opportunity to email Katrina with any questions or clarifications you might have, and then she'll direct those questions as appropriate to someone who can give you the answer for them.
Great, all right. Oh, one more question. Okay, with the first entry being free, what is the cost of each entry after that? So the cost at the moment that's proposed and will be advertised when the call for entries come out, but it's around $440 per entry, including GST this year. Right, last chance for any other questions. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. No, it looks like it's all gone silent. Oh, no, someone beat me to it. So is it possible to share the presentation material on the NZILA website? Do you mean this recording or? So the recording of this webinar will be available to view. Perfect. So that will be available in the video library on the website, and there will also be a very detailed call for entries PDF document to assist you in preparing your entry as well, and provide all the eligibility criteria, etc., that will come out closer to the call for entries opening. Great, all right, I think that seems like the end of the questions. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you very much, Meg, Jackie and Peter, for your time. And we look forward to receiving your entries for the awards this year and seeing you all at the dinner on the 27th of May. So thanks very much.